The moment Seraphine Narok set her clay cup down on the rough-hewn porch railing and said, "My clan sends me to seduce you for the land." Lucas Keller felt the evening air go still around them both, the crickets falling silent as though the world itself wanted to hear what came next. He had been watching the way the last amber light caught in her dark hair, tied back with a leather cord, and how her green fingers curved around the cup with an unexpected delicacy. For 2 weeks, she had been coming to his homestead at the edge of the disputed floodplain, bringing first a basket of wild herbs as thanks for some small kindness he could barely remember, then staying longer each visit, sharing stories and laughter that felt too easy, too natural, too real to be anything but what it seemed. He had told himself a dozen times not to read more into her visits than neighborly goodwill, but his heart had not listened, and now those words hung between them like a blade. Before he could shape his face into whatever expression was supposed to follow such a confession, she added with a crooked smile that showed the small tusks at the corners of her mouth, "It's working, isn't it?" The question landed with such naked vulnerability that Lucas found himself laughing, a short, surprised sound that broke the tension in his chest. "I don't know whether to be flattered or insulted," he said, leaning back against the porch post with his arms crossed, studying her face in the dimming light. How calculated was any of it? Seraphine looked away toward the river meadow that rolled down from his homestead in a gentle slope of knee-high grass, the disputed territory that had brought armed men to shout across boundary lines 3 times in the past month alone. "The first visit was orders," she said quietly. "My uncle, the clan elder, he told me to come here, to smile at you, to make you think of me when the settlers meet to discuss the land. He said a man with softness in his heart makes poor decisions at the negotiating table. And now?" Lucas asked, keeping his voice level despite the way his pulse had begun to hammer in his throat. She turned back to him, and there was something fierce and frightened in her amber eyes. "Now, I wake up thinking about the way you laugh when you tell stories about your brother's bad luck with fishing. Now I find excuses to walk this direction even when I have no reason to be near the human settlement. Now I am terrified because I came here to deceive you, and instead I have deceived my own people by falling in love with the one man I was supposed to manipulate." The honesty of it struck Lucas like a fist to the sternum. He had been the elected negotiator for the settler community for 2 years, chosen because he kept his head when others shouted, because he listened before he spoke, because he could find compromise where others saw only battle lines. But standing here with Seraphine's confession hanging in the air between them, he felt the weight of that responsibility like never before. If anyone from the settlement saw them together, saw the way he looked at her, they would call it betrayal. They would say she had succeeded in her mission, that he had been weakened, that he could no longer be trusted to defend their interests. "The land meeting is in 3 days," he said, more to himself than to her. "We're supposed to present our final position to the territorial magistrate, and your clan is supposed to present theirs, and whoever makes the stronger legal claim gets the meadow." "I know," Seraphine said. She stood and walked to the edge of the porch, her hands gripping the railing. "My uncle has been preparing arguments for weeks. He says the meadow has been orcish hunting ground for generations, that our people have more right to it than settlers who arrived 5 years ago with land deeds from a faraway governor who never set foot in this territory." "He's not wrong," Lucas admitted and saw her head turn sharply toward him. "The legal claim is muddy at best. We have deeds, yes, but they were drawn by people who didn't consult with the clans already living here. It's theft dressed up in official language. Then why do you fight for it?" She asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, only genuine curiosity. Lucas moved to stand beside her, looking out over the darkening meadow. Because the people who came here are trying to build something. They're farmers and craftsmen, not soldiers or conquerors. They need that meadow for summer grazing, for the good soil near the river. If we lose it, a dozen families will struggle to feed their livestock through the winter, and some of them will leave, and the community will fracture. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm not saying we're entitled to it. I'm saying I understand why they're afraid to lose it, and they chose me to speak for them, so I have to try. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. My uncle says the same thing. That our people need the meadow for the same reasons. That if we lose it, we lose our best foraging ground, our access to the river for fishing in summer. That it will be seen as weakness, and other clans will think we can be pushed off our own land piece by piece, until we have nothing left. So we're trapped, Lucas said. Both sides need the same piece of land and only one can have it, and if either of us backs down, we betray our own people. Unless there's a third option, Seraphine said, turning to face him fully. The last light of day caught on her face, highlighting the sharp line of her jaw, the curves of her cheekbones. What if neither side backs down, but neither side takes everything either? Lucas felt something shift in his chest, a spark of possibility he hadn't allowed himself to consider. Shared use, he said slowly. A compact that gives both groups access to the meadow for different purposes at different times under agreed rules. Could your people accept that? Seraphine asked. Would they see it as compromise or as losing? I don't know, Lucas admitted. But I'm going to find out, because the alternative is watching good people on both sides tear each other apart over grass and water. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the strength in her fingers, the slight roughness of her palm. You took a risk telling me the truth tonight. Let me take one too. Come with me to the next settlers' meeting. Let them see you as I do, as someone trying to find peace instead of war. Seraphine's eyes widened. They'll never allow it. An orc at their council meeting. They'll think you've lost your mind. Maybe I have, Lucas said with a small smile. But you're right that this won't work if we keep negotiating through intermediaries and official channels. Someone has to break the pattern, and it might as well be us. She squeezed his hand once, hard, and then let go. I need to think about this, she said. If I agree, I'm putting my neck in a noose. My uncle will see it as betrayal, as choosing you over the clan. Then don't do it for me, Lucas said. Do it because it's the right thing, because more people will suffer if we let the hardliners on both sides drag this into violence. He paused. But I won't lie and say I don't hope you choose to trust me, because these past 2 weeks have been the best I've had in longer than I can remember, and I don't want to lose that. Seraphine looked at him for a long, searching moment, and then she nodded once. Tomorrow night, she said. I'll give you my answer tomorrow night. But Lucas, you need to understand something. There are people in my clan who want this fight, who think violence is the only language humans understand. If we move forward with this, we're not just negotiating land use. We're fighting against everyone who profits from keeping our peoples separate and afraid. I know, Lucas said quietly. We have the same people in the settlement, men who talk about driving the orcs out entirely, about expanding our territory by force. They're loud and they're angry, and they scare the others into silence. He met her gaze steadily. But I didn't come to this frontier to be part of another war. I came because I wanted to build something better than what I left behind. That has to mean something, or what's the point? She reached up and touched his face briefly, her fingers cool against his cheek. And then she was gone, moving down the porch steps and across the meadow with the easy loping stride that covered ground faster than it looked. Lucas watched until she disappeared into the tree line on the far side. then went back inside his cabin and sat at his rough table with a cup of tea he didn't drink, thinking about land and loyalty and the space between them, where love had somehow taken root. The next day dawned clear and warm, and Lucas spent the morning working his own small plot of land, turning soil for a late planting of turnips, repairing a section of fence that the deer had been testing. The physical work helped settle his mind, gave him something to do with his hands while he thought through the arguments he would need to make. Around midday, his nearest neighbor, a leathery old farmer named Thomas Greer, came walking up the road with a sack over his shoulder. "Heard you've been having a visitor," Thomas said without preamble, setting the sack down by Lucas's fence. "Orc girl with dark hair comes up here every few evenings." Lucas felt his spine stiffen. "News travels fast," he said evenly. "Fast enough," Thomas agreed. He pulled out his pipe and began the slow ritual of packing and lighting it, squinting at Lucas through the first curl of smoke. "Some folks are wondering if maybe you're not the right man to represent us anymore, if you're getting friendly with the other side." "I'm doing my job," Lucas said. "Part of that is understanding what the clans want and need, same as I understand what we want and need. Can't negotiate if you don't know the other party's position." Thomas puffed his pipe, considering. "That's one way to look at it," he said. "Another way is to say you're getting soft, letting a pretty face cloud your judgment." He held up a hand before Lucas could respond. "I'm not saying that's what I think. I'm saying that's what some of the younger men are saying, the ones who'd rather burn the orcs out than talk to them." "Let me guess," Lucas said. "Garrett Fisher and his friends." "Among others," Thomas confirmed. Garrett Fisher was a blacksmith's son, broad-shouldered and hot-tempered, who had made no secret of his belief that the settlement should take the meadow by force and deal with the consequences later. He had a following among the younger men, the ones who saw compromise as weakness and violence as strength. "What do you think?" Lucas asked quietly. "You've been on this frontier longer than anyone else in the settlement. You remember when it was just you and two other families out here." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching the smoke from his pipe drift up into the clear sky. "I think the only thing worse than losing land is losing good people fighting over it," he finally said. "I came out here to get away from wars and politics, and people telling me who I could and couldn't trade with. If we start killing orcs over a meadow, we're just bringing the same poison to a new place, and I'm too old for that nonsense." He looked directly at Lucas. "But I'm one voice, and I'm not the one who'll have to do the fighting if it comes to that. The young ones will, and they're scared and angry, and fear makes people stupid. Then I need to give them something better to be than scared," Lucas said. "I'm working on it." Thomas nodded slowly. "See that you do, because the meeting is in 2 days, and if you walk in there without a solid plan, Fisher and his lot will push for armed occupation of the meadow, and then we'll have blood on our hands before the week is out." After Thomas left, Lucas spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a proposal, writing and rewriting the terms of a shared-use compact that might satisfy both communities. The grazing rights would rotate by season, with the settlers using the meadow in summer when their livestock needed fresh pasture, and the clans using it in spring and fall when the hunting and foraging were best. The riverbank would remain open to both groups year-round for fishing and water access, but neither side could build permanent structures without mutual agreement. Disputes would be settled by a joint council, 2 representatives from each community, with a neutral magistrate as tiebreaker only if the 4 couldn't reach consensus. It was imperfect, full of potential complications and loopholes that would need to be addressed over time. But it was something, a framework that acknowledged both groups had legitimate needs and neither would get everything they wanted. Lucas knew it would be a hard sell to the settlement council, and he had no idea how the orc clans would respond, but it was the only path forward he could see that didn't end in violence. As the sun began to set, he heard footsteps on the porch, and when he opened the door, Seraphine was there, her face drawn and tired. "I told my uncle everything," she said without greeting. "About coming here, about falling in love with you, about what you proposed." Lucas felt his stomach drop. "What did he say?" "He called me a traitor," Seraphine said flatly. "He said I had shamed the clan, that I was thinking with my heart instead of my head, that I had let myself be used by a human who saw me as a tool to steal our land." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "Then my aunt, his wife, told him to stop being a stubborn fool and listen to what I actually said instead of what he assumed I meant." "And did he?" Lucas asked, hope flickering cautiously in his chest. "Eventually," Seraphine said. She sank into the chair by his table, looking at the papers covered in his careful handwriting. "He listened while I explained that you were proposing shared use, not surrender, that you understood the legal claims were questionable on both sides, that you were willing to risk your own standing with the settlers to find a peaceful solution." She looked up at him. "He doesn't trust you, and he doesn't like that I've chosen to trust you, but he agreed to consider the proposal on one condition." "What condition?" Lucas asked, sitting across from her. "That I bring you to speak directly to the clan council tomorrow night," Seraphine said. "That you stand in front of the people who see you as an invader and make your case for why they should share their land instead of defending it. He wants to see if you're brave enough to risk what I've risked." Lucas felt his mouth go dry. The thought of walking into an orc clan gathering, of standing before leaders who had every reason to hate and mistrust him, was terrifying. But Seraphine had risked everything by telling the truth, and he had meant what he said about taking risks of his own. "I'll do it," he said. "When and where?" Relief washed over Seraphine's face. "Tomorrow at sundown at the old oak grove 2 miles north of the meadow. It's neutral ground, used for important councils." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Lucas, you need to understand what you're walking into. There will be warriors there who fought humans in the border wars 20 years ago. There will be clan members who lost family to human expansion. They will look at you and see an enemy, and you'll be alone with no one to protect you if things turn bad." "Will you be there?" Lucas asked. "Yes," she said, "but I don't know how much good I can do. I'm already seen as compromised, as someone who chose personal feelings over clan loyalty." "Then we'll be compromised together," Lucas said with a faint smile. "Besides, if they wanted to kill me outright, they'd just ambush me on the road. The fact that your uncle agreed to a council meeting means he's at least willing to listen, even if he doesn't like what he hears." Seraphine stood and moved around the table, and Lucas rose to meet her. She leaned her forehead against his, and they stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid this won't work, that too many people want the fight more than they want peace, that we're going to lose each other before we've even really begun." Lucas wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solidity of her, the warmth of her body against his. "I'm afraid too," he admitted. "But I'd rather be afraid and try than safe and silent. Whatever happens tomorrow, at least we'll have tried." They stayed like that as the darkness deepened outside, holding each other against the uncertainty of what was coming. And when Seraphine finally left, Lucas felt the loss of her warmth like a physical ache. He spent the night revising his proposal, anticipating questions and objections, trying to imagine what it would take to convince people who had been hurt and frightened by his kind that cooperation was possible. The next day moved with agonizing slowness. Lucas attended to his chores mechanically, his mind already in the oak grove, rehearsing arguments and discarding them as insufficient. In the afternoon, he walked down to the settlement commons, where several families had gathered for a communal barn raising. He found Thomas Greer helping to set beams and pulled the old man aside. "I need you to do something for me," Lucas said quietly. "Tomorrow night is the official land meeting, and I might not be back in time. If that happens, I need you to present my proposal to the council." Thomas's eyes sharpened. "Where are you going to be? Doing something either very brave or very stupid," Lucas said. He pulled out a folded copy of his shared-use compact and handed it to Thomas. "This is my proposal for the meadow. It gives both communities access under a rotating schedule with a joint council to manage disputes. I need you to argue for it if I'm not there." "And where will you be instead?" Thomas asked again. "Speaking to the Orc clan council," Lucas said, "making the same proposal to them." Thomas let out a low whistle. "That's bold, I'll give you that. Also possibly suicidal." "Possibly," Lucas agreed. "But if I'm going to ask the settlers to trust the clans, I need to show I'm willing to trust them first. And if I'm going to ask the clans to trust us, I need to respect them enough to speak to them directly, not through intermediaries and official letters." Thomas studied him for a long moment. "You're in love with that Orc girl, aren't you? The one who's been visiting?" There was no point in denying it. "Yes," Lucas said simply. "Does she love you back?" Thomas asked. "She says she does," Lucas said. "I believe her." Thomas folded the proposal and tucked it into his shirt. "Then I hope you're right, because you're betting everything on it." He clapped Lucas on the shoulder. "I'll present your compact if you're not there, and if you don't come back at all, I'll make sure people know you tried to do the right thing, even if it got you killed." "Cheerful thought," Lucas said dryly. "Realistic thought," Thomas corrected. "Now go do your brave, stupid thing and try not to die. We need negotiators more than we need martyrs." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Lucas changed into his best clothes, simple but clean, and strapped a knife to his belt more out of habit than any belief it would do him good if things went wrong. He walked north from his homestead, leaving the familiar territory of the settlement behind, moving through the disputed meadow with its waving grass and gentle slope down to the river. The beauty of it struck him anew, the reason both communities wanted it so badly. It was a place that promised plenty, where livestock could grow fat and wild game would come to drink, where the soil was rich and the water was clean. It deserved better than to be a battlefield. The oak grove appeared as the light turned golden, a cluster of ancient trees that must have been growing here for centuries before either humans or orcs arrived. Their massive trunks were twisted with age, their branches spreading wide to create a natural canopy. As Lucas approached, he saw that the space beneath the trees was filled with orcs, dozens of them, far more than he had expected. They stood in loose clusters, talking quietly among themselves, but as he stepped into the grove, every conversation stopped and every eye turned to him. Lucas felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure, felt himself assessed and judged and found wanting. He saw warriors with scars on their arms and hardness in their faces, elders with white streaked hair and expressions of deep skepticism, younger orcs whose hands rested on weapons with the casual readiness of those who knew how to use them. And there, near the center of the gathering, stood Seraphine beside a tall male orc with iron-gray hair and a face like weathered stone, who could only be her uncle. Lucas walked forward, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm, and stopped several paces from the clan elder. "Thank you for agreeing to hear me," he said, pitching his voice to carry but not shout. "I know I'm not welcome here, and I know you have no reason to trust anything I say. But I'm here anyway, because the alternative to talking is fighting, and I don't want to see good people die over a piece of land we could share." The elder regarded him with cold amber eyes so like Seraphine's but without any of her warmth. "I am Gareth Narok," he said, his voice deep and rough. "War leader of the Stone River clan, and uncle to the foolish girl who has risked everything for you. You will tell me why I should not have you removed from this grove and forbidden from ever approaching our territory again." "Because I'm offering you something better than uncertain victory in a legal battle you might lose," Lucas said steadily. "I'm offering a guaranteed share of the meadow, with rights spelled out in a binding compact that protects both your interests and ours." "We don't need a compact to use land that is already ours," a voice called from the crowd, and Lucas turned to see a young male orc with fresh scars on his knuckles step forward. "We've hunted that meadow since before your people even knew this territory existed. Your paper deeds mean nothing." "You're right," Lucas said, and saw surprise flicker across several faces. "The deeds were written by people who never consulted with you, who treated this land as empty when it clearly wasn't. That's not right and it's not just. But here's the problem. My people don't see it that way. They see legal documents that say the land is theirs, and they see families who will struggle without it. They're not trying to be cruel. They're trying to survive. So they steal from us in the name of survival," another voice said, an older female orc with white in her hair. "How is that different from any other theft?" "It's not," Lucas admitted. "But here's what I'm asking you to consider. If we go to the magistrate with competing claims, one side will win and one side will lose, and the losing side will be angry and desperate. That anger will fester until someone does something violent, and then we'll have a cycle of retaliation that ends with people dead on both sides." He paused, looking around at the assembled faces. "Or we can choose a third path. We can agree to share the meadow under terms that give both communities what they need most, and we can build a framework for settling future disputes without bloodshed." "Why should we trust that you'll honor such an agreement?" Gareth asked. "What stops your people from breaking the compact the moment it's inconvenient?" "The same thing that stops your people from breaking it," Lucas said. "Mutual interest, mutual oversight, and consequences for violation. The compact I'm proposing includes a joint council, 2 representatives from each side, who meet regularly to ensure both communities are following the terms. If either side breaks the agreement, the other has grounds to appeal to the territorial magistrate for enforcement." "And you think your people will agree to this?" Gareth asked skeptically. "You think they'll accept sharing when they could fight for the whole thing?" "I think some of them will and some of them won't," Lucas said honestly. "Just like some of your people will see this as sensible compromise and others will see it as weakness. That's why I'm here, talking to you directly. Because the hardliners on both sides want the fight more than they want the land, and if we let them set the terms, we all lose." Seraphine stepped forward then, moving to stand beside Lucas. "He's right," she said, and her voice was steady despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. "I've spent weeks among the settlers, watching them, listening to them. Most of them aren't conquerors. They're farmers and craftsmen who came here hoping for a better life. They're afraid of us the same way we're afraid of them, and that fear is being fed by people who profit from conflict. You've spent weeks being courted by this human," the young male warrior said with undisguised contempt. "Forgive me if I don't trust your judgment, Seraphine. You've clearly been compromised." "I've been honest," Seraphine shot back, her eyes flashing. "Which is more than I can say for the people who want to push us into a war they won't have to fight themselves. You talk about defending our land, Corvan. But what you really want is an excuse for violence because you're bored and restless and you think combat will make you a hero." Corvan took a step toward her, his hand moving to the axe at his belt, and Lucas moved instinctively to place himself between them. "Don't," he said quietly but firmly. "If you want to be angry at someone, be angry at me. I'm the one who started this. She's just trying to prevent bloodshed." "Stand down, Corvin," Gareth said sharply. "We are here for counsel, not posturing." He looked at Lucas with something that might have been grudging respect. "You have courage, human, I'll grant you that, but courage doesn't make your proposal sound." "Then let's talk about what would make it sound," Lucas said. He pulled out his written proposal and handed it to Gareth. "These are the terms I've drafted. Seasonal rotation of grazing rights, shared river access, joint council oversight, neutral arbitration for disputes. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying it's a starting point for negotiation." Gareth took the papers and read through them slowly, his expression giving nothing away. The other clan members waited in tense silence, and Lucas felt Seraphine's presence beside him like an anchor, keeping him steady. Finally, Gareth looked up. "These terms are not unreasonable," he said slowly, and Lucas felt a flutter of hope. "But they rest on an assumption that your people will honor them, and I have seen too many broken promises to take that on faith." "Then what would it take to give you that faith?" Lucas asked. "What guarantee can I offer that would make you willing to try?" Gareth was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was thoughtful. "A bond," he said. "Something personal and immediate so that if your people break the compact, you personally suffer the consequences." Words on paper are cheap. Stakes must be real. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of bond?" "You and Seraphine will be the first representatives on the joint council," Gareth said. "You will be responsible for ensuring your respective communities follow the terms. If the settlers violate the compact, Seraphine has the right to demand restitution from you directly. If the clans violate it, you have the same right from her." He paused. "And you will both live in a house built on the boundary between our territories, visible to both communities, so that everyone knows you are serious about this partnership." Lucas glanced at Seraphine and saw his own surprise mirrored in her face. It was a bold requirement, one that would make their relationship unavoidably public and tie their personal fates to the success of the compact. It was also, he realized, exactly the kind of visible commitment that might convince skeptics on both sides that this was more than political theater. "I accept those terms," Lucas said, "if Seraphine does." Seraphine looked at her uncle, then at Lucas, and then back to the assembled clan members. "I accept," she said clearly. "And I swear before the Stone River clan that I will uphold this compact with all my ability, and that I will hold Lucas to the same standard." A murmur ran through the crowd, some voices approving, others doubtful. Gareth raised a hand for silence. "Very well," he said. "I will present this proposal to the full clan council tomorrow morning. If they approve, we will send representatives to the settlers' land meeting tomorrow night with terms of negotiation." He fixed Lucas with a hard stare. "But understand this, human. If you are deceiving us, if this is some trick to lower our guard, the consequences will be severe and permanent. Are we clear?" "We're clear," Lucas said. "I'm not trying to deceive anyone. I'm trying to build something that lasts, something better than endless conflict over who has the right to exist here." Gareth nodded once, and the tension in the grove eased slightly. Other clan members began to move forward, some to examine the written proposal, others to speak quietly with Gareth. A few approached Lucas directly, asking pointed questions about how the seasonal rotation would work. What would happen if a drought or flood disrupted the schedule? How disputes over hunting rights would be handled? Lucas answered as best he could, acknowledging when he didn't have perfect solutions, but emphasizing that the joint council could adapt the compact as problems arose. As the gathering began to break up, Seraphine touched his arm gently. "We should go," she said quietly. "You've made your case, and staying longer won't help." They walked out of the oak grove together, and Lucas felt the weight of dozens of eyes on his back, measuring, judging, deciding whether he was worth the risk. Once they were clear of the trees and walking through the darkening meadow, he let out a long, shaky breath. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever done," he admitted. "You did well," Seraphine said. "Better than I expected, honestly. My uncle is not easily impressed, and you got him to seriously consider the proposal." "Did I get you into trouble?" Lucas asked, thinking of the way Corvin had looked at her, the accusations of being compromised. "I was already in trouble the moment I told the truth," Seraphine said. "But this way, at least the trouble might lead to something good." She was quiet for a moment and then added softly, "A house on the boundary. A life together where everyone can see. That's not a small thing he's asking. Is it something you want?" Lucas asked, stopping to face her in the dim light. Seraphine looked up at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. "A month ago I didn't even know you existed," she said. "Now I'm agreeing to build a life with you as the price for peace between our peoples." "It's terrifying and exhilarating and completely insane." She reached up and touched his face. "Yes, it's something I want, even with all the complications and the risk and the certainty that we'll be judged by everyone who sees us. I want this. I want you." Lucas kissed her then, a brief sweet press of lips that tasted of hope and fear in equal measure. "Then let's make it work," he said. "Whatever it takes." They walked back to his homestead together, and Seraphine stayed the night, not for seduction but for solidarity, the two of them sitting up late at his table, refining the proposal and discussing how to present it to the Settlers' Council the next evening. They anticipated objections, drafted responses, and built contingencies for the inevitable complications. And when they finally slept, it was in each other's arms, a fragile comfort against the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. The next day arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that promised autumn rain. Lucas woke early, made breakfast for two, and felt the strange domestic rightness of it, the easy way Seraphine moved through his small cabin as though she belonged there. They ate together in comfortable silence, and then she left to return to her clan for the morning council, while Lucas prepared for the evening meeting with the settlers. He spent the day reviewing his arguments one final time, then walked down to the settlement commons as the sun began to set. The meeting was held in the largest structure in the settlement, a combination warehouse and gathering hall with rough benches and a raised platform at one end. By the time Lucas arrived, the hall was already crowded. Families and individuals from across the settlement packed in to hear what would be decided about the disputed meadow. Thomas Greer was there, standing near the front, and he gave Lucas a small nod when their eyes met. But Lucas also saw Garrett Fisher and his followers clustered in one corner, their expressions hard and hostile. This was going to be a fight. The settlement's elected chairman, a weathered farmer named Richard Kowalski, called the meeting to order and gave Lucas the floor. "We're here to decide on our final position regarding the river meadow," he said. "Lucas has been leading the negotiations as our representative, so I'll let him present his proposal." Lucas stepped up onto the platform and looked out at the assembled faces, seeing fear and anger and exhaustion in equal measure. These were people who had risked everything to come to the frontier, who had worked themselves to the bone to build farms and homes from raw wilderness. They deserved honesty. "I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear," he began. "Our legal claim to the meadow is weak. The deeds we have were issued by people who didn't consult with the clans already living here, and a territorial magistrate might well rule against us." A murmur of protest rippled through the crowd, but Lucas pushed forward. "But even if we win, we lose. Because a legal victory that the clans see as theft will lead to conflict, and conflict will lead to people dying, and some of those people will be our neighbors and our family." "So you're saying we should just give up?" Garrett Fisher called out. "Let the orcs have everything because we're too scared to fight for what's ours?" "I'm saying we should fight smarter," Lucas said. "I'm proposing a shared use compact that gives us guaranteed access to the meadow for summer grazing and the river for year-round water access. In exchange, the clans get the same meadow for spring and fall foraging and hunting. Both communities win, and no one has to die." "That's cowards' talk," Garrett said, standing up. "Those orcs have been looking for an excuse to drive us out since the day we arrived. You give them an inch and they'll take everything." "Is that what you really believe?" Lucas asked, looking directly at Garrett. "Or is it just easier to hate them than to acknowledge they are people with the same needs and fears we have?" "I believe actions, not words," Garrett shot back. "And their actions say they see us as invaders." "Some of them do," Lucas agreed. "Same as some of us see them as savages who need to be driven out. But those aren't the only voices, and they don't have to be the loudest." He pulled out his proposal and held it up. "I spent last night in the Orc Clan's Council Grove, presenting this same compact to people who had every reason to kill me on sight. And you know what they did instead? They listened. They asked hard questions. And they agreed to consider it, because enough of them are tired of the threat of violence and want to try something different." The murmuring in the hall grew louder, some voices supportive, others skeptical. An older woman near the front raised her hand. "What guarantee do we have that they'll honor this compact? What stops them from agreeing now and breaking it later?" "The same thing that stops us from breaking it," Lucas said. "Mutual oversight through a joint council, binding arbitration for disputes, and real consequences for violation." He explained the structure Gareth had proposed, including the requirement that he and Seraphine serve as the first council representatives and live on the boundary between territories. "You're tying yourself to an orc woman," someone called out, and there was shock in the voice. "I'm committing myself to making this compact work," Lucas said. "And yes, that means building a partnership with someone from the clan. Her name is Seraphine, and she's risked everything to help broker this peace, same as I have." Garrett laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "So the rumors are true. You've been bedding an orc, and now you want us to trust your judgment on whether we should give away our land. This is exactly what I warned about. He's been compromised." Lucas felt anger flash hot in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "I'm in love with her, yes. And that doesn't compromise my judgment. It clarifies it. Because I've spent time actually talking to the people we're supposedly negotiating against, and I've learned they're not monsters. They're farmers and hunters and families, just like us, trying to survive on land they've lived on for generations." He paused, letting that sink in. "If falling in love with someone who wants peace makes me compromised, then I guess I am. But I'd rather be compromised by love than corrupted by fear." Thomas Greer stood up then, his voice cutting through the rising noise. "I've known Lucas Keller for 2 years," he said. "And in that time, I've seen him negotiate fair prices with difficult traders, settle disputes between neighbors without taking sides, and put the community's needs ahead of his own comfort. He's earned the right to be heard, even if his proposal makes us uncomfortable." He looked around the hall. "I've also lived on this frontier longer than anyone else in this room, and I can tell you that peace is always cheaper than war, even when the peace is imperfect." And what happens when their warriors decide the compact isn't good enough and they want the whole meadow? Garrett demanded. What happens when we've weakened ourselves by trusting them and they stab us in the back? Then we'll deal with it, Thomas said bluntly. But we'll deal with it from a position where we've built relationships and communication instead of starting from nothing but hostility. The compact doesn't mean we disarm or stop being vigilant. It means we try cooperation before defaulting to violence. The debate went on for another hour, voices rising and falling as people argued the merits and risks of Lucas's proposal. Some saw it as pragmatic compromise, others as dangerous appeasement. Lucas answered every question he could, acknowledged the legitimate concerns, and refused to back down from his core argument that shared use was better than contested ownership. Finally, Richard Kowalski called for a vote. All in favor of authorizing Lucas to negotiate the shared use compact with the Orc clans, raise your hands. Lucas watched as hands went up across the hall and felt his heart hammering in his chest. It wasn't unanimous, not even close. Garrett and his followers kept their hands firmly down, and a good third of the room looked uncertain. But when Richard counted the votes, the margin was clear: 53 in favor, 32 against. "The motion carries," Richard said. "Lucas, you're authorized to negotiate the compact on our behalf. But understand this: if it fails, if we end up worse off than we started, that's on you." "I understand," Lucas said quietly. As the meeting broke up, people filtered out in small groups, some stopping to clasp Lucas's hand and wish him luck, others leaving in stony silence. Garrett walked past without a word, but the look he gave Lucas was full of contempt and promised future trouble. Thomas waited until most of the crowd had dispersed, then approached Lucas with a tired smile. "Well, you got your chance," he said. "Now comes the hard part, making it work." "I know," Lucas said. He felt exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "Thank you for speaking up. It made a difference." "Just don't make me regret it," Thomas said gruffly. "Now go find your Orc girl and tell her the news." Seraphine was waiting at his homestead when he returned, pacing the porch with anxious energy. When she saw him, she ran down the steps. "What happened?" she asked breathlessly. "We have authorization," Lucas said. "Narrow margin, but enough. The Settlement Council voted to pursue the compact." Seraphine's face lit up with relief and joy, and she threw her arms around him, laughing. "My uncle convinced the clan council too," she said. "They agreed this morning with conditions. We have 4 elders who will represent the clan in formal negotiations with your council." Lucas held her tight, feeling the reality of what they had accomplished beginning to sink in. "So now we have to make it work," he said. "Now we have to make it work," Seraphine agreed. She pulled back to look at him. "Lucas, there's something else." After the clan council voted, Corvan and 2 of his friends left the grove. They were angry, talking about how the compact was surrender and that real warriors wouldn't stand for it. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "Garrett Fisher walked out of our meeting with the same expression," he said slowly. "He and his followers are convinced I'm betraying the settlement." Seraphine's eyes widened. "You think they'll try to sabotage this?" "I think they'll try something," Lucas said. "The question is what? And how do we stop them before they ruin everything?" They spent that night planning for contingencies, trying to anticipate what the hardliners on both sides might do to derail the negotiations. The most obvious flashpoint was the meadow itself, still technically disputed ground. If either side moved to occupy it by force before the compact was signed, it would destroy any chance of peaceful resolution. "We need to talk to both councils," Seraphine said. Get them to agree that the meadow remains neutral ground until the compact is finalized. No grazing, no hunting, no occupation by either side. That might work, Lucas agreed, but it also leaves the meadow empty and vulnerable. If someone wants to stage an incident, an empty meadow is the perfect place to do it. Then we watch it, Seraphine said. We take turns keeping an eye on the meadow, and if anyone from either side tries something, we intervene before it escalates. It was a fragile plan, dependent on their ability to spot trouble before it spiraled out of control. But it was better than doing nothing. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Lucas and Seraphine met with representatives from both communities, hammering out the specific terms of the compact. The settlers wanted guarantees about the quality of grazing land and the timing of rotations. The clans wanted assurances about hunting rights and river access. Both sides wanted clarity on what would happen if someone violated the terms, whether intentionally or by accident. The negotiations were tense and exhausting, with moments where it seemed like the whole thing would collapse over some minor detail. But slowly, painfully, they built consensus. The compact began to take real shape, a document with teeth and specificity, with mechanisms for enforcement and adaptation. On the 4th night, Lucas was walking the perimeter of the meadow during his watch shift when he heard voices. He moved quietly toward the sound, staying low in the tall grass, and saw 3 figures standing near the river. Even in the dim moonlight, he recognized Garrett Fisher's broad shoulders and aggressive stance. The 2 men with him were holding torches. "We burn the meadow tonight," Garrett was saying. "Make it look like the orcs did it, like they're trying to destroy the land so we can't use it. That'll turn opinion against the compact fast enough." Lucas felt rage and fear war in his chest. He was 1 man against 3, and they were planning to destroy the very land they claimed to be protecting out of sheer spite and political calculation. He needed help, needed backup, but there was no time to get it. If he left to find Thomas or Richard, Garrett would have already set the fire. He was still trying to figure out his next move when another voice spoke from the darkness, calm and cold. "I would not do that if I were you." Seraphine stepped into the moonlight, and behind her were Corvan and his 2 companions from the clan. For a moment, Lucas thought his heart would stop. This was exactly the kind of confrontation that could ignite violence between the communities. 6 people with weapons and anger and fear, meeting in darkness on disputed ground. "This is none of your concern, Orc," Garrett said, his hand moving to his belt knife. "This is human land, and we're dealing with human business. You are about to burn a meadow that is under negotiation for shared use," Seraphine said steadily. "That makes it very much my concern. It also makes it very stupid, because destroying the land helps no one." "Unless we make it look like your people did it," Garrett said with a nasty smile, "then it helps us plenty." Corvan stepped forward, his face twisted with disgust. "You would destroy your own land just to blame us. You are exactly the kind of coward I expected humans to be." "Says the savage who was probably planning the same thing," one of Garrett's companions shot back. "Actually, we were planning the same thing," Corvan admitted, and Lucas felt his stomach drop. "Burn the meadow, blame the humans, turn our people against the compact." "But then this one," he jerked his head toward Seraphine, "dragged us out here and made us watch while she explained what we would actually be destroying." He looked at the meadow with something like shame. "She's right. This is coward's work, no matter who does it." Garrett stared at him. "You're just going to give up. Let them steal your land." "The land isn't being stolen," Seraphine said firmly. "It's being shared, which is better than fighting over it until no one can use it because it's covered in graves." Lucas stepped out of the grass then, making his presence known. All 6 of them turned sharply toward him, hands going to weapons, and he raised his own hand slowly. "Everyone needs to calm down," he said quietly. "Garrett, if you light that fire, I will personally testify that you sabotaged the compact and you'll answer to the Settlement Council. Corvan, same goes for you and the Clan Council." "You can't prove anything," Garrett said. "I just heard you planning it," Lucas said. "And so did Seraphine and Corvan and everyone else standing here. You really think they won't corroborate my story?" Garrett looked at Corvan, clearly trying to decide whether the orc would actually side with a human against one of his own. Corvan looked back with an expression of contempt. "The human is right," Corvan said flatly. "You are planning sabotage. I was planning sabotage. We are both fools, and I at least am willing to admit it." The tension held for another long moment, and Lucas watched Garrett's face work through rage and frustration, and the slow realization that his plan had fallen apart. Finally, with a curse, Garrett threw his torch into the river and stalked away into the darkness, his companions following. Corvan did the same with his own unlit torch, tossing it into the grass. "I still think this compact is a mistake," he said to Seraphine. "I still think humans cannot be trusted, but I will not sabotage my own clan's decision just because I disagree with it." He looked at Lucas. "Prove me wrong, human. Show me that trust is not the same as foolishness." "I'll try," Lucas said quietly. The three orcs left, and Lucas and Seraphine stood alone in the meadow, both of them shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "That was too close," Seraphine said. "Way too close," Lucas agreed. "But we stopped it, and more importantly, we stopped it together with help from both sides." "Corvan helped because I shamed him into it," Seraphine said. "I don't know if that will hold if he gets angry again." "Maybe not," Lucas said. "But for tonight it was enough." He took her hand. "Come on, let's finish the watch together, make sure no one else tries anything stupid." They walked the meadow perimeter side by side, and when Lucas's shift ended they returned to his homestead. In the morning, Lucas reported the attempted sabotage to Richard Kowalski, and Seraphine reported it to Gareth. Both communities took it seriously, posting their own watches on the meadow, and making it clear that anyone who interfered with the compact process would face consequences. The final negotiations took another week, with representatives from both sides meeting daily to refine terms and address concerns. Lucas and Seraphine served as mediators, translating not just words but intent, helping each side understand where the other was coming from. It was exhausting work, made harder by the knowledge that Garrett and Corvan and others like them were waiting for any excuse to declare the whole process a failure. But slowly, impossibly, it came together. The Shared Use Compact took its final form, a document that both communities could live with if not love. The signing was scheduled for mid-afternoon on a clear autumn day, to take place in the very meadow they had all been fighting over. Lucas and Seraphine arrived early, along with a crew of volunteers from both communities who had worked through the previous night to build a simple platform in the center of the meadow. It was made of rough timber, nothing fancy, but it stood as a visible symbol of cooperation. Representatives from both sides began arriving around noon, gathering in separate clusters, eyeing each other with lingering wariness but without the open hostility of weeks before. Richard Kowalski and Gareth Narok mounted the platform together, the human and orc leaders standing side by side. Richard spoke first, his voice carrying across the meadow. "We're here today to do something that many said was impossible, to choose cooperation over conflict, to choose shared prosperity over contested ownership. This compact isn't perfect, and it won't solve every problem. But it's a start, and it's a better start than the alternative." Gareth nodded and took his turn. My people have lived on this land for generations, and we have seen too many times what happens when outsiders arrive with deeds and declarations, and the assumption that they have the right to take what they want. This compact does not erase that history, but it acknowledges it. It says that both our communities have legitimate needs, and that we can meet those needs without destroying each other. Thomas Greer stepped forward with the physical compact, a bound sheaf of papers written in both human and orcish script, and set it on a small table that had been placed on the platform. Richard signed first, his signature bold and clear. Gareth signed second, using a different alphabet but with equal solemnity. Then the other representatives from both communities came forward in turn, adding their marks to the document. When the last signature was added, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd, humans and orcs mixing together for the first time without weapons or suspicion. It wasn't universal. Lucas could see Garrett standing at the edge of the gathering with his arms crossed and his expression sour. But enough people were celebrating that it felt like a genuine victory. Seraphine found Lucas in the crowd and pulled him aside. "We did it," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "We actually did it." "We did," Lucas agreed. He wrapped his arms around her and held her close, not caring who saw. "Now we have to make sure it lasts." Over the following weeks, they began the work of implementation. The Joint Council met for the first time, with Lucas and Seraphine serving as co-chairs alongside two other representatives from each community. They addressed the inevitable small conflicts that arose, disputes over boundary markers and grazing schedules and fishing rights, and worked to resolve them before they could escalate. The house on the boundary took shape through communal effort, volunteers from both communities coming together to raise walls and set beams. It was built exactly on the line between settler and clan territory, visible from both sides, a constant reminder of the commitment Lucas and Seraphine had made. The design was a hybrid, incorporating both human and orcish building techniques, and the result was something unlike anything else on the frontier, a true collaboration. When the house was finished, Lucas and Seraphine moved in together, and that night they sat on their new porch watching the sun set over the meadow. "It's strange," Seraphine said quietly. "A few months ago I didn't know you existed. Now I'm living with you, bound to you by compact and choice, responsible for keeping the peace between our peoples." "Strange doesn't begin to cover it," Lucas agreed. He reached over and took her hand. "But I wouldn't change it. Even with all the pressure and the judgment and the constant work of making sure this doesn't fall apart, I wouldn't change it." Seraphine leaned her head on his shoulder. "Neither would I," she said. "Though I reserve the right to complain when the council meetings go long, and Corvan won't stop arguing about fishing quotas." Lucas laughed. "He's getting better, you have to admit. Last week he actually agreed with one of Thomas's points without making it a fight." "That's because Thomas bribed him with that smoked fish," Seraphine said. "Corvan will agree to anything if you feed him well enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out. In the distance, Lucas could see the lights of the settlement, and in the other direction the cook fires of the clan's main encampment. Two communities, learning to coexist, held together by a compact that was still fragile but growing stronger with each passing day. The seasons turned, and the meadow went through its first full cycle under the new compact. The settlers brought their livestock for summer grazing, and the grass grew lush and thick under careful management. In autumn, the clans moved through for their traditional foraging and hunting, and they took only what they needed, leaving the land healthy for the next season. The Joint Council met monthly, addressing problems as they arose, and slowly the representatives from both sides began to trust each other, to see each other as partners rather than adversaries. There were still challenges, of course. Garrett Fisher never accepted the compact, and he left the settlement the following spring, taking his closest followers with him to start a new homestead further west, where he wouldn't have to see orcs sharing what he considered human land. His departure actually made things easier, removing the most vocal source of opposition. Corvan stayed, and though he remained skeptical, he proved willing to work within the system, especially after he and Thomas bonded over their shared love of fishing and their shared frustration with bureaucratic inefficiency. In the second year after the compact was signed, Seraphine discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy and terror in equal measure. A child born to a human father and orc mother was unprecedented in this territory, and both communities would be watching to see what it meant. Lucas and Seraphine talked long into the night about what they would tell their child, how they would raise them to belong to both worlds without being torn apart by the tension between them. When the baby was born in early spring, she was perfect. A daughter with green-tinged skin lighter than Seraphine's, small tusks that would grow more prominent as she aged, and her father's dark eyes. They named her Petra, and both communities came to the Boundary House to see her, bringing gifts and blessings and a cautious hope that this child represented a future where the lines between their peoples might blur and soften. Petra grew up running through the meadow, playing with children from both the settlement and the clan, learning to speak both languages and honor both cultures. She was the first, but not the last. Other couples, emboldened by Lucas and Seraphine's example, began to form bonds across the community divide. The boundaries didn't disappear, and there were still those on both sides who viewed such relationships with suspicion or outright hostility, but they became less unusual, less scandalous. The meadow itself became a symbol of what was possible. Twice a year at the spring and autumn equinoxes, both communities gathered there for a festival, celebrating the compact and the peace it had brought. There were games and competitions, shared meals and music, storytelling and trading. The festivals were loud and chaotic and imperfect, but they were joyful, and that mattered. Lucas continued to serve on the Joint Council for years, working alongside Seraphine to maintain and strengthen the compact. They dealt with droughts and floods, with new settlers arriving who didn't understand the history, with young orcs and humans who chafed at the restrictions and wanted to renegotiate terms. Each challenge tested the compact, and each time they found ways to adapt and endure. On their 10th anniversary of signing the original compact, the Joint Council voted to expand it, adding provisions for trade cooperation, mutual defense against external threats, and a formal apprenticeship program that would allow young people from both communities to learn from each other's craftsmen and hunters. The expansion was Petra's idea, presented with the passionate idealism of a 10-year-old who had grown up seeing cooperation as normal and couldn't understand why it had ever been otherwise. Lucas stood on the porch of the Boundary House that evening, watching the sun set over the meadow, and felt Seraphine's arms wrap around him from behind. "She's growing up so fast," Seraphine murmured. "Soon she'll be asking to join the council herself." "Let her," Lucas said with a smile. "We could use her energy and her refusal to accept that things have to be difficult." "You're getting old and soft," Seraphine teased. "I remember when you were the young idealist insisting that peace was possible." "I'm not old," Lucas protested. "I'm experienced. There's a difference." Seraphine laughed and kissed the back of his neck. "Keep telling yourself that, love." They stood together watching the light fade, And Lucas thought about the scared, determined man who had stood on this very ground a decade ago, listening to an orc woman confess that she had been sent to seduce him, and that it had worked despite her intentions. He thought about everything that had happened since, the risks and the rewards, the failures and the victories. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when he questioned whether the effort was worth the cost. But looking at the peaceful meadow, at the house that stood as a bridge between communities, at the daughter who represented a future neither side could have imagined, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that every difficult moment had been worth it. "My clan sent me to seduce you for the land," Seraphine said softly, echoing her confession from so long ago. "It's still working, isn't it?" Lucas turned in her arms and kissed her, long and deep and full of a decade's worth of love and partnership. "Every single day," he said when they finally broke apart. "Every single day." Years continued to pass, and the compact evolved with them. Lucas and Seraphine eventually stepped back from the joint council, making room for younger representatives who brought fresh perspectives and new ideas. Petra joined the council when she turned 18, passionate and articulate, arguing for even deeper integration between the communities. She was joined by others like her, children born to mixed families or simply raised in the new era of cooperation, who saw the old divisions as historical curiosities rather than present realities. The Boundary House became a gathering place, a neutral ground where people from both communities could meet to resolve disputes, celebrate occasions, or simply share a meal. Seraphine's skills as a mediator became legendary, her ability to see through bluster and anger to the real concerns underneath. Lucas focused on the practical implementation of council decisions, working with farmers and hunters to ensure the land management practices actually worked in practice, not just in theory. When Petra was 20, she married a young man from the settlement, a carpenter's son named Miles, and the wedding was held in the meadow with representatives from both communities in attendance. It was a joyful, chaotic affair, blending traditions from both cultures, and it marked another quiet milestone in the ongoing project of building something new from two different foundations. Lucas and Seraphine became grandparents when Petra had her first child, a boy they named Simon. He had his grandmother's green skin and his grandfather's dark hair, and he was doted on by both communities. More grandchildren followed as the years passed, each one a living embodiment of the compact's success, each one growing up in a world where cooperation between humans and orcs was simply the way things were. In their later years, Lucas and Seraphine spent long evenings on their porch, watching the meadow change with the seasons, watching new generations make the compact their own. They had arguments and disagreements, moments of frustration and exhaustion, but they worked through them the same way they had worked through every challenge, together, with honesty and patience and a commitment to finding solutions rather than assigning blame. On a warm summer evening when Lucas was in his 60s, he sat on the porch with Seraphine and watched their grandchildren playing in the meadow below, a mixed group of human and orc children chasing each other through the grass, without any awareness of how remarkable their easy friendship would have seemed to an earlier generation. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Seraphine asked, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity of decades. "When I walked up to this porch and confessed that I was supposed to be manipulating you." "I think about it all the time," Lucas admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how uncertain, how easy it would have been to let fear win, to decide that the risk was too great." He squeezed her hand. "I think about how lucky I am that you were brave enough to tell the truth, and that I was brave enough to believe you." "We were both terrified," Seraphine said with a soft laugh, We had no idea what we were doing. We still don't, most of the time, Lucas said, but we figure it out as we go, and that seems to be enough. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, watching their grandchildren play in the meadow that had once been disputed ground and was now common heritage. The compact they had fought for was no longer a fragile experiment but a lived reality, woven into the fabric of daily life for both communities. "My clan sent me to seduce you for the land," Seraphine said again, and Lucas heard the smile in her voice. "I wonder if my uncle ever imagined it would end like this. With his niece married to a human, his great-grandchildren playing with settler children, and the meadow shared peacefully for decades," Lucas said. "Probably not, but I think he'd be pleased anyway, stubborn old bear that he was." Gareth had passed away several years earlier, and to everyone's surprise he had asked to be buried on the edge of the meadow, his grave marked with a simple stone that bore inscriptions in both human and Orcish script. It had been his final statement about the compact, an acknowledgement that the land belonged to both peoples now, and that divisions only had power if people chose to maintain them. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lucas felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The journey from that first confession to this quiet evening had been long and difficult, full of obstacles and opposition and moments where everything could have fallen apart. But they had persevered, and in doing so, they had built something that would outlast them both. "It's still working, isn't it?" Seraphine asked quietly, leaning her head on his shoulder. Lucas wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close, feeling the solid reality of her warmth, the steady rhythm of her breathing. "Every single day," he said, echoing his answer from so many years ago. "Every single day, and I wouldn't change a moment of it." They sat together as the night deepened around them, two people who had started as tools in other people's plans and had chosen to write their own story instead. The meadow stretched out below them in the moonlight, peaceful and shared, a testament to what was possible when people chose love and cooperation over fear and division. And in that moment, with his wife in his arms and their legacy playing out in the laughter of grandchildren who knew no boundaries, Lucas understood that they had succeeded in ways that went far beyond any compact or agreement. They had built a future worth believing in, and that was enough.